I'm going to talk about Haiti. I just want to put it in a little context at the Smithsonian. You know, at the Smithsonian, we have 139 million things. It's the largest collection on the planet. Ranges from, microscopic fossils from millions of years ago to the space shuttle Discovery and everything in between. So it's a pretty eclectic collection. And of course, we work to preserve it. And we train people from around the world and around the United States in conservation. We have about 150, maybe 180 conservators at the Smithsonian who are working on everything around our collection, from preserving First Ladies' gowns. You know, at the Smithsonian, if you're working on this stuff and you screw it up, you're really in trouble. You know, you mess up a First Lady's gown, or you may, mess up, we're trying to save Neil Armstrong's spacesuit right now. It's having a little trouble, but...
Is that after it was tried on by one of the donors?
No. But, from Thomas Jefferson's desk, they wrote the Independence onto Gold Flake that started the California Gold Rush. We have a lot of stuff that we preserve, and it takes a lot to do this. We preserved the Star-Spangled Banner. That was a $58 million project. That's the flag that when we sing, when you hear people like humming the words because they can't sing them, at a game, that is the Star-Spangled Banner. That's the flag that flew over Fort McHenry in 1814. It took years and years of conservation work to preserve that. And then, of course, we do all that because we want to inspire, current and future generations to understand history, understand culture. I mean, there's the stories, and then there are things that we keep. I think, watershed moment has certainly come up, I think, in your forums here is, and work by people like Larry and others at the University of Chicago. Real watershed moment was cultural recovery and conflict during the Iraqi Museum, where I think, it opened up a lot of people's eyes to say, well, it's not only like we that have treasures in the United States, but other people have their treasures. And somehow our thoughts, our processes have to be attuned to the fact that other people value their stuff maybe as much as we value our stuff. And there's always a issue of how to do that. And we're familiar with some of the statements that at the time Rumsfeld and others made about the looting and the relative value or lack of value of things that were looted or in play. And with Hurricane Katrina, in some ways, although not as a result of a U.S. conflict, but a natural disaster, I think a lot of folks in the Smithsonian started waking up and saying, maybe we have a responsibility beyond the storerooms and beyond the museums on the mall and what we, hold for the American people, but maybe we have some responsibility beyond. Now, at that time, I went to the secretary of the Smithsonian, the guy who was secretary at that time during Katrina. I said, let's help. We have a lot of relationships in New Orleans with the Art Museum, the World War II Museum, others. In New Orleans, we're getting phone calls from our colleagues. They're saying, hey, like the water's rising, help us, provide storage, materials, crates, can you do anything? And my boss, the head of the Smithsonian at that time, said, not our job. That kind of pissed me off. And pissed off is a kind of bureaucratic category you find in Washington. But it usually then proceeds and helps spur action. Okay. So Haiti, the earthquake, you're familiar. You saw pictures on the TV, newspaper, magazine. Anybody go to Haiti? Anybody been to Haiti recently? Okay. So after this was, horrendous earthquake centered in Port-au-Prince, and the destruction was really unprecedented. About 300,000 killed, 1 million injured, 2 million people left homeless. Haiti was a poor society, one of the poorest countries by any economic measure in the Western Hemisphere before the earthquake, and totally devastated as a result of this, with really no infrastructure to do much about it. Now, the first thing in Haiti was obviously to get food and medicine and help survivors and feed people. And that's what everybody did first in the international community, the U.S. community, and Haitians themselves. That's what they try to do. But we're also concerned with what was happening to Haiti's heritage. If you recall at that time, if you go back to just after the earthquake, before there was food and medicine in Haiti, People didn't want to go back into their homes because their homes had collapsed. Buildings had collapsed. So people were on the street. There was no water. There was no food. There was no medicine. What did the Haitian people do? They sang. They sang. Haiti, Haitians have been through a hell of a lot for the last 500 years. Brutally colonized, a brutal colony of France, enslaved. And in 1803, 1804, as a result of a series of slave revolts, they rose up and they kicked out the French. That is the very reason we have most of the United States. The Louisiana Purchase was made possible because Napoleon's armies were defeated in Haiti. He felt he could not defend his North American colonies and therefore sold the whole shebang to Thomas Jefferson. So the Haitians achieved independence, abolished slavery, and indeed gave us a good chunk of our country. But it was culture, it was that sense of banding together, of not having many material goods, but having a strong sense of who they were as a people. That gave Haitians really the strength, I think, to persevere through those first days and get by without food, medicine, and other help. Very strong, very resilient people. You heard it over and over again, and I think it's true. Okay, so what happened with Haiti's heritage? Well, this is the White House, the National Palace, totally wrecked. This is the National Cathedral of Haiti, downtown Port-au-Prince, built early in the 20th century. This is what it looked like before the earthquake. It was a scene of regular masses and national celebrations and so on. That's what it looked like after. It's like you dropped a bomb on it. This is the Holy Trinity Cathedral. You see these murals. It had 14 murals, beautiful murals, some like 3 and 4 stories high, some a story and a half. These were murals painting, they were done for the bicentennial of Port-au-Prince in 1949 and 50 by some of Haiti's master artists. The subjects of the murals are totally fascinating because while they're scenes from the Bible, the scenes are all Haitian. And people in them are Afro-Haitian. And so it was a way, and there's voodoo symbols and so on, it was a way in which the Haitians were accommodating Christianity to their own beliefs. And so they're real treasures. Well, that's what the church looked like the morning of the earthquake, and that's what it looked like after. Only 3 of the murals barely surviving. This is the Nader Museum, probably the largest collection, private museum, largest collection of paintings. This is before the earthquake. Wonderful panoply documenting decades and decades of Haitian painting, historical events, styles, perceptions, dreams, aspirations, the whole thing. That's what the museum looked like after. There was no building left. The first impulse, I say, after Haitians tried to rescue their family members and friends and neighbors was really to form groups to start trying to save important cultural material. So the library and the archives, organized people. I mean, they even had the wherewithal to make up T-shirts. Within days of the earthquake, to go in and try to retrieve some of this stuff. Because again, that Haitian sense of who they were, their heritage, everything was in disarray. And the idea that somehow who you are as a people is also going to be lost under the rubble was pretty daunting. So Haitians tried with shovels and hands and gloves and so on to try to get cultural materials out of the rubble. This fascinating scene. There's a music school in Port-au-Prince behind that Episcopal church that I showed. You can see the building listing, See the vehicle over here. And look what's happening. Parents and teachers from the school are throwing out musical instruments in the window to save them, even as that building is collapsing, because it means a lot to them and the music school, the music the kids made. Again, a whole symbol of community and who they are. It just so happens that the Minister of Culture, the ex-Minister of Culture, he just resigned about 2 weeks before the earthquake, was a good friend who had worked at the Smithsonian. I had the First Lady of Haiti had been my student at Johns Hopkins SAIS. Smithsonian had done a series of programs with Haiti, so we had pretty good ties, and we knew people in the leadership. And indeed, one of my good colleagues who'd been a fellow at the Smithsonian and a curator of a Smithsonian exhibition on the Citadel, a historical architect, was put in charge by René Préval of the earthquake recovery. So we had a line into Haiti's leaders to say, hey, we think we can do something. And I was buoyed by this because unlike the previous secretary of the Smithsonian in Katrina, the current secretary, who was secretary during the Haitian earthquake as well, Wayne Clough, was an engineer by training, a geologist. He had worked in San Francisco, worked in Katrina, knew geology as a scholar, but also knew, earthquakes and what it could do. And he said, let's go for it. So I went down to Haiti, and I was aided by this person, Corey Wegner, who Larry and people here might know. Corey had been in the military reserve, had served in Iraq, and had gone into the Iraqi museum after the looting. She then formed an organization, offshoot of an organization in the United States called Blue Shield. And immediately after the earthquake, she had called a meeting in Washington. Blue Shield is a voluntary NGO. It's affiliated with a national organization of Blue Shield. And the whole idea is, you got the Red Cross, you got the Blue Shield. Red Cross helps people, Blue Shield helps, heritage in times of, pretty much defined in terms of military conflict, but also edges into, times of natural disaster. So Corey calls a meeting, and this is another kind of Washington thing that you get. And I'm not a government official, which is good. Even though the Smithsonian is part government, part not government, I'm not government, thank goodness. So you can kind of do things, and you can't get in trouble for something that if you're part of government. Anyway, so Corey calls a meeting, and you're sitting around the table, and it's the Department of Defense, and it's the State Department, and it's the Library of Congress, and the National Archives, and the Kennedy Center, and the Smithsonian, and then the different NGO groups, the American Institute for Conservation, and the President's Committee, and the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, and so on, and the American Association of Museums, and all these groups sitting around the table. We go around the table, and Corey says, okay, what are we going to do with Haiti? It is next door. The U.S. is in there, going in there in the big way with the Navy in terms of helping the Haitians. We have this long-standing relationship with Haiti. Are we going to do anything? Their cultural heritage is in the rubble. And one by one, you just go around and you sit around a table, and everybody says, well, it's not my job. And the State Department says, it's not my job, and Defense says it's not my job, and it's nobody's job. And I just happened to be sitting at the last seat at the table, and I said, this is like crazy. The U.S. government, after Iraq, after Katrina, can't get its act together to help people save its cultural heritage. This is crazy. So anyway, I got inspired by Corey, so we ended up going down to Haiti, getting a sense of stuff. We enlisted the American Institute for Conservation. I figured the Smithsonian, while not government, does get federal money. We have a federal standing, so maybe we can use our standing in the federal government to shoehorn something. And then the American Institute of Conservation had trained with Institute of Museum and Library Services grants, people called AIC CERT conservators. That is, they had trained, as a result of Katrina, conservators who were trained to go into dangerous situations. Because you get a laboratory person who's used to work to a spiffy laboratory in a university or museum, and then all of a sudden, like, they're in a dangerous situation, you better know what you're doing. So
that was an
MLS grant.
Push that they created that.
Yeah. And that was, they had put a few $1 million to that and trained about 140 people. So I knew.
Say what the IMLS is for people that don't
Yeah,
know.
Institute of Museum and Library Services. It's a federal agency. It gets, about $200 million. It usually re-grants it to train librarians and museum people and so on. So I knew there was a network of people trained. We had connections through the Smithsonian and maybe a little clout and good ties to the Haitian government. And we had Corey who could conceptualize and think about, what an effort would look like. So I figured maybe we can do something in Haiti. That took a lot of effort, though, because to get something done you know how it is. I mean, you read the paper, you watch the news. Get something done in Washington is tough. To get something new is really tough. To get people to talk together, approve stuff, and get money for stuff is like impossible. Well, it turns out in one of those quirky things, I knew Elizabeth Préval, First Lady of Haiti, again for a long time. She was coming to Washington. I was coming back from Haiti. I think it was like March 8th or March 9th. So this is about almost 2 months after the earthquake. And that morning, as I was coming back from Haiti, Michelle Obama was donating her inaugural gown to the Smithsonian. So why mess around with all the bureaucracy? So the secretary and I were able to talk to Michelle Obama directly. She was hosting Elizabeth Preval over at Blair House anyway for the next 2 days. So we started talking about, hey, we could do something in Haiti. Michelle Obama says, go for it. I say, you know, we got a problem. The problem is the military, and Corey and I had met with General Keane, who's down there, who's the head of the Southern Command for the US military. That was a joint task force that was doing work in Haiti. When we had gone down there, we said, hey, you got generators, you got tents, you even got porta-johns, you got vehicles, you got all sorts of things here, US military. Maybe you can give us some of that for culture. You know, because we had 20,000 troops in Haiti. There's a lot of stuff. Give us just a little, and maybe we can use that to dig up rubble, dig up paintings, you know, and help people out. He was all fine for that, but he said, look, I'm a military guy. I need an order. Somebody has to give me an order. Who's going to give an order? Well, when you get into disaster situations, if it's a wartime situation, the Defense Department is in charge and state follows defense. If it's a rescue operation, humanitarian operation, state leads and defense follows. So we had to get state. So anyway, we ended up getting Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, Cheryl Mills. We'd worked with her very closely. And she was able to give the order. General Keane said, we'll do whatever you want. And all of a sudden, it looked like we were in business, and Ms. Obama and the Haitian First Lady were working it out. So it looked like we could have a project, except, and I worked closely with, at that time, Janetta Cole, also an anthropologist who's the head of our African Art Museum. What we were doing is the First Lady of Haiti comes up and says, you can't believe it. I mean, people are suffering, it's terrible, but also the kids are painting the earthquake. That is, the earthquake is still, it's not only like our heritage is in the rubble, we're making it as we speak. And so she had me and Janetta agree to do an exhibit at the Smithsonian of the Haitian kids' art, and Michelle Obama and Jill Biden went down to paint with the kids in Haiti. Okay, so we put together a partnership. We got the Haitian ministers together. We got the different agencies of the US, but still nobody had any money. Nobody had a dime. Now, I was able to use some Smithsonian money from another account. It was okay. I got Jim Leach over at the National Endowment for the Humanities to give me something, Rocco Landsman from the endowment, but we didn't have any big money. I mean, there's, you know, $15,000, $20,000. So the White House ended up, the head of the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. I mean, you're just thinking of this. You're trying to put together a project. I mean, this is the US government. You're doing it like it's a PTA bake sale. So Rachel, who's the executive director of the President's Committee for Arts and Humanities, and they have a lot of volunteers that work with them, and one of the volunteers is Margot Lyon, who's a Broadway Tony-winning producer, and she has friends on Broadway, and she talks to those friends, and we get money from something called the Broadway League. What's the Broadway League? The Broadway League runs all the Schubert organization, all those theaters on Broadway. So why would they give to Haiti? This was one of those wonderful things. I'm a New Yorker, and usually New Yorkers, you know, you say like, you know, how are you? Good day. F you, you know, I mean, it's like, but here I was like really proud of my New York colleagues because they made the attention, said, you know, after 9/11, with our catastrophe in New York, it was so important to get Broadway up and running. It showed we were alive, we were vital, we were not going to lie down, we were not dead. And so they said, we get it. That the earthquake is to Haiti, saving cultural heritage in Haiti after the earthquake is like opening up Broadway after 9/11 in New York. And what they did is they charged everybody an extra $1 for a ticket. If you have any relatives or friends, they paid me $1. And we took money. It ended up being about $300,000 at that time, and enabled us to get started. And, you know, in retrospect, I mean, we ended up using for this project probably about $5 million, but that first $300,000 was vital to get started because it took the U.S. Congress close to 18 months to finally pass an Haiti Aid Act. So if we hit with aid, you know, you're waiting for 18 months. You know, don't have dinner, you know, wait 18 months, what's the problem? Really a disaster. So anyway, we had some money. And so we put together a coalition. We got UNESCO involved, the different Haitian ministries, US NGOs, and so on, and put together a coalition. started on the ground planning, figuring out what we're doing during this time that we're trying to get the money together and get everybody's agreement. We had to do a lot of legal agreements. Believe me, if you have U.S. folks handling Haitian patrimony, you know, are you going to give it back? You're not going to take it away? All those kind of things. Are you going to deal with private collections as well as public collections? What does the Smithsonian do? You can imagine our lawyers just going bananas in Washington about figuring this out, but we made them figure it out. We ended up taking there was a building, not an old, it's actually pretty new. The United Nations Development Program had a building in Port-au-Prince. Recall that the UN building in the earthquake had collapsed, about 300 people killed. That was next door to this. This building was okay. We had Navy engineers check it out, Smithsonian engineers check it out, and we ended up paying the rent. Rent alone cost $600,000 for the year. So, you know, you're just getting a scale of operation. It's not something like just pitching a tent and being able to do this. And there was no power. So we had to bring in generators from Canada and get those through the port pretty quickly and carry in supplies. And at that time, flights, everything was backed up. So it was basically hand carrying in conservation supplies, tools, things we needed to be able to get in and start up. And we put together a Haitian, Smithsonian, American, international team of people, including a conservator from Iceland. Now, Iceland and Haiti is about as far in the world as you can get. I think in terms, but here were conservators from Iceland and Belgium and other places in India helping out in Haiti, as well as people from across the Smithsonian. Our chief conservator was Stephanie Hornbeck. She had retired from the Smithsonian a week before the earthquake. She heard we were organizing this effort. She calls me up, she said, "Richard, you know, I did my master's dissertation on Haitian art. I know French, I know Creole. I've worked, you know, for 15 years as the chief conservator here at the Smithsonian at the African Art Museum. Can I help?" I said, "Stephanie, do I have a deal for you?" And Stephanie then spent 2 years in Haiti doing that work. So we sent in skilled conservators, we got vehicles, we collected damaged things. You know, we had established legal agreements with people to take their stuff so it would be returned, established Gail Joyce. Her day job is registrar of the National Museum of the American Indian, but she speaks French. So there she was in Haiti setting up a registrarial system so we can take in things. Basically, the idea was to treat artifacts, everything from, you know, historical artifacts, basic treatment, some restoration where we could do it, pretty simple, but also historical documents. This one from the 1790s documenting Haitian general strategies with regard to their revolt against the French. Paintings that had been damaged. And all the while, very much at the beginning, was the notion that we would not do this as just a, you know, a bubble of Americans or international teams in Port-au-Prince, but that integral to this was training a whole cadre, whole generation of Haitians to do the work, because this is going to take a generation or more to do the kind of scale that needs to be done. So we ran training workshops. We worked with a unit related to UNESCO. It's called ICRAM. It stands for like the International Council for the Restoration and Treatment of Cultural Property. It's out of Rome. They do a lot of conservation training, so we paid them to do it again. UNESCO didn't have a dime to do anything. ICRAM didn't have to dime. Everybody became our contractor, so that we can get money to people so that they can help us in terms of doing the work. We publicized efforts that we were doing through Smithsonian Magazine. As I said, you know, you had artists and children painting the earthquake, beautiful. Some of the paintings, I mean, obviously kids painting, and what you saw with the kids painting, at first they were all gray and pretty bad, and then they started getting color back to them, and you saw the kind of therapeutic use of art among you know, Haitian youth. But some paintings were amazing. It's hard to tell on the detail of this. This is kind of like the tree of life, you know, which is a, you know, you see as a pretty common theme in various Haitian arts. But after the earthquake, there was an idea that there might be a tsunami caused by the earthquake, and so people were looking at where to get to high ground. And the horrible thing in this painting is, if you look closely, it's, you know, it's basically people climbing over the dead bodies of their relatives and friends and neighbors to do that. It's very haunting. And we did an exhibition at the Smithsonian on the power of art. To heal, we brought Haitian artists to the Folklife Festival during the summer on the National Mall to keep that in front of the public, try to raise some money. We brought choirs up from Haiti to do programs at the Smithsonian. So basically to try to keep culture in the eye and also help support some of the people that were carriers of the culture, producing exhibitions in New York and at the Clinton Library and so on. Some big projects. This was the Sant Art. This was a place that trained, when you think about Haitian, what you might call Haitian naive art or folk art, Hippolyte's art, and so on, this was the center of it. And for really in terms of making Haitian art known, and it collapsed. There were, I don't know, something like 7,000 paintings in here, 1,000 sculptures, all sorts of documentation of, again, Haitian art since the 1950s. That's what it looked like. Talk about open storage. We were able to get, the U.S. didn't have the Corps of Engineers there, they did, but the Japanese engineering troops were there. And so we were able to, arrange with the Japanese troops. So our folks are in yellow hats, Japanese troops are in blue hats. Japanese troops were able to supply some of the heavy equipment because no matter what we wanted to do, we could never get like a crane and a knapsack. It was just not going to work. So they had the real material. So we were able to really go through the rubble, train Haitians in terms of the retrieval of objects in rubble and so on. And then we set up a project that took about 18 months, which was really to triage collections, and then ended up involving dozens of people in terms of cleaning collections off, getting back to a state so you get the debris, remove insect infections, all that kind of stuff, and really processing thousands and thousands of pieces, and training people all along in the doing so they could take over. What the conservators would do in some cases was just amazing. I mean, this is a Hippolyte painting. I think this was at the Nader Gallery. And you can see, I mean, this is what it looked like when it came out of the rubble, in pieces. And then that's what it looks like now. That's like magic. So we treated and saved about 5,000 paintings from the Sant Art. Had flat storage, for archives and sketches and drawings and so on. And a lot of metalwork came out of the Sant Art. That was a form of Haitian artistry developed a few generations ago. And, it meant not only training people, but bringing down people in material science and imparting a sense of chemistry and how objects interact, because, you kind of have to deal with all that rust that's accumulated from the rubble. So this is really a before and after picture. It's pretty marvelous. And all the sculpture then was saved and stored and so on. This was a painting from the palace, the National Palace. I showed you that photograph at the beginning. Pretty amazing, the destruction in there. A contemporary painting, a very dignified Haitian lady. And actually this is actually restored a bit. This was in two pieces because you see the white canvas in the background. So this is already taken from two pieces to one. But working with our conservators and Haitian artists and Haitian professors, we're able to work on that painting, and that's what it looks like now. So, it really is amazing work. Nationally important sculpture from the the legislature, from the president's palace, from the National Museum, all found in pieces and so on and restored. So Haitians can have that heritage. This is the National Archive after the earthquake. That's now. And working with the National Archives, shelving things, and trying to figure out appropriate climate control, because if you put in air conditioning and fancy HVAC systems, it's not going to work on a Wednesday afternoon. So figuring out how to get airflow, how to make these things work in a sustainable way was a major part of the project. And as I say, training people, saving rare books, historical books, treating the books, again, assembly lines to deal with with things at least on a temporary basis. And we saved, thousands and thousands of rare and historical documents and books. Probably the most ambitious project were the Holy Trinity murals that I spoke about at the beginning. These are folks at the murals at the Holy Trinity Episcopal Church, which was founded during the height of the Civil War by abolitionists from Connecticut, from New Haven actually, who went down to Haiti. If you remember, Frederick Douglass, others had a lot of hope about Haiti. Here we had slavery in the United States, and here was Haiti. The U.S. refused to recognize Haiti for 58 years after its independence. It was finally Abraham Lincoln, after a wonderful speech given by Wendell Phillips at the Smithsonian and then the next day at the Congress, that Lincoln decided to recognize Haiti. But these folks from New Haven had started this church. The church built, collapsed, built, collapsed. I don't know, this is probably about the 5th or 6th, 7th incarnation of the church. And as you can see from like the evidence of cinder block, was composed of all sorts of material, as it kind of built and, kind of pretty typical eclectic construction. This was one of the murals, the mural of the Last Supper. And the idea was that these murals, as you can see, were on walls. The walls were leaning, the walls were falling over, and the walls were cracking. And we were going to lose these 3 surviving murals out of the 14 painted in 1949, 1950. So we figured, well, at the least we had to design scaffolding to at least hold up the walls to figure out whether we could save this or not, and then come up with a plan. And we ended up hiring 2 wonderful conservators, one a Cuban American, the other Argentinian, who worked on wall paintings and wall murals and other earthquake damage situations around the world. One of the things when you're doing this, it's not so simple. You really need people who have the expertise to deal in these kind of situations to do something. Okay, so now we have to come up with a plan of what we're going to do. Now, I'm a Jewish kid from Queens. And they said, well, Richard, if we're going to save the church, this is not public-private. This is owned by the Episcopal Church. You need to call Catherine Shorey. She's the Archbishop of the Episcopal Church for the United States. They have a relationship with Haiti. They'll probably raise the money for the church. You got to tell her what you're going to do because, they got to know. It's their church. So I call her up, and I say, look, she says, I explained what we're going to try to do. She said, well, Dr. Kurin, I understand. I have a lot of faith in the Smithsonian. You guys good. You know what you're going to do. But what's your biggest fear? I said to the Archbishop, well, you ever see Mel Brooks in The History of the World Part 2? I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. Mel Brooks is coming down from Mount Zion with the tablets. And he says, oh, people of Israel, I give you the 10 commandments. I said, my worry is we literally have to chip these murals off the wall. And my worry is that as we chip the murals off the wall, I want them to come down in the size of Pennsylvania and Texas and Alaska, big chunks. And I'm worried that as we do this, we'll end up getting Rhode Island and Delaware. Just start crumbling. So there is a risk. But we worked on it. We tested materials. I mean, the confluence here of engineers from doing the scaffolding in a way that would allow us to do this, to laboratory scientists at the Getty and at the Smithsonian Materials Conservation Institute, we needed to study the paint and to figure out what would work. What kind of paint was this? As we took it out, and you'll see the strategy in a minute, it's like, gee, is this going to work or is the paint going to come off? Well, so we had to analyze paint samples of different parts of the murals. Of course, they would paint at slightly different times in different paints. One of the painters actually was still alive. And he's now in his 80s, and he said, like, hey, do you remember it was April 1950, what paint you used? He actually did. It was an egg-based water paint. Anyway, we did a lot of experimentation to figure out how we're going to do this. And Viviana Dominguez, who people affectionately called Captain Dominguez, really had to go inch by inch through this, and you can see the substrate. You see the painting. The mural in large part is painted on a thin layer of mortar over, in some cases, cinder block, and in some cases, river stone. And what you're going to do is you're going to peel it off the wall. Not easy. So we needed to do murals. We had a whole Haitian crew that worked. We actually had 2 art professors. We had art students who all of a sudden, used to doing art, now getting into conservation. And by virtue of that, actually learning more about art. Wonderful. So we had to clean. These had been out in the, without real shield from, rain and wind and everything, getting a lot of salt in them. So we really had to thoroughly clean these murals. And then the idea was to cover them with a protective fabric and kind of paint it on, and you'd be able to peel the fabric off. And, think about it. You guys use stickies, right? Okay, so imagine putting Scotch tape on a painting. And if you pull it off, the painting will come off with the Scotch tape. If you did a sticky on a painting, okay, the paint isn't going to come off, but the sticky is not going to provide a lot of surface level support for the painting. So you got to get that just right. So we did all sorts of experiments with 3M, with our scientists, to try to develop compounds that actually would work for the different murals. And then, in a high-tech age, this is the plan. So basically, this is the Last Supper, face of Jesus, number 40. And basically, what we were trying to do, what Viviana and Rosa Loewinger were trying to do, was make cuts that would avoid, make use of the ruptures in the wall, the fissures in the wall, and then where we had a cut into the cinder block or something, do it so faces would remain whole. So in any restorative thing, you wouldn't have that kind of problem. So this is and again, I can't emphasize enough, you're standing there with the bishop of the church, you're standing there with the clergy of the church, you're standing there with practitioners, and people who really regard these as treasures, and they're in your hands. You can't do it lightly. And so you really gotta, put in the time and get it right and figure out how to do this. And so basically the idea was to chip the mural off, put on the protective covering, chip the mural off the wall. Now what we needed to do is, the reason for the protective fabric is because just to create enough surface tension when we peel this, so we created an exoskeleton. So basically you have a protective fabric kind of glued onto the wall, then gluing these wooden, this exoskeleton to the fabric, not to the painting. So that would hold, so when it comes off, you can take, Pennsylvania off, not get Rhode Island. And then, using drills and chisels and so on, and being very careful in extracting every fragment, and then removing fragments one by one from the mural over the course of months. And then finally, the last piece of the mural, we removed 3 murals. The last piece was the face of Jesus, and removing the framework of that afterwards, and then working on the micro cracks and fissures that had developed since the earthquake, since they were painted, so when you store these, they'll be able to survive as you move them around and so on. So there's the murals. 147 fragments. Big job. So once we had the murals, then the question is what to do. Well, we're not ready to rebuild the church, so now you got to build a storage facility to hold those fragments, so when the Haitians are ready, when the church is ready, and they do rebuild it, you can then come back in and restore those, and either set those. There was a lot of debate whether to set those in the walls, to make them freestanding, to put them inside, outside. We'll have that debate, for a few years until the church is rebuilt. But here's actually the leading clergy of the cathedral explaining their plans for rebuilding. They're in a fundraising mode now to rebuild that whole thing. There's a hell of a lot of work to do in Haiti. Even now, here we are several years after the earthquake. These are audiovisual collections. Unlike the paintings, for example, or the sculptures, which were largely centered, or archives or rare books even for that matter, which are centered in a few key places, when it came to audiovisual materials, everybody collected photos. People had videos, the TV stations, radio stations, people, documenters, folklorists, people had their own stuff. And so here you're talking about Haitian performance, you're talking about plays, you're talking about political discourse, you're talking about events and celebrations, rituals, all sorts of things, documenting Haiti's more living cultural traditions that are on, you know, videotapes and cassettes and media that are very fragile. And that's a big thing on our to-do list next. Not everything was successful. This is the interior of the National Cathedral I showed you at the top. And the head of the cathedral had Catholic, Roman Catholic cathedral. The head had been killed. There was issues over succession and getting a decision. We were pushing them for months to make a decision so we can salvage things in the cathedral. And it just took so long that by the time we were able to get the agreement of the church, people had scavenged everything out of it. So this is like a scene out of Mad Max or something. I mean, it's just... well, the big thing that we wanted to salvage and we thought we can do, and again, you get incredible stories. Here in an earthquake, who would think the glass would survive? But the stained glass survived. And it was very important stained glass. And there was a Haitian American who was so skilled in saving stained glass. Now he works in New York, works largely in Brooklyn and New York City, where he saves glass from churches and synagogues. And he had studied this for years, the church here, and he said, Richard, we have to do something, we have to do something. By the time we got in there, it was too late. You see, you know, I mean, here's one of the rosettes, and that's a lot of surviving glass. The glass was basically being tossed away so that people can get to the metal, right, the lead that holds the glass. If you look on eBay, you know, we saw it coming up on eBay, $5 a piece of glass. Okay, so I got tired of, and I couldn't afford paying $600,000 a rent for the old UNDP place, because it wasn't owned by the UN, it was owned by a private guy who was making a lot of money off it. And also we realized that there was a need in Haiti for a more permanent presence, a center for conservation of materials, because even though the effects of the earthquake were massive, I think it's safe to say around the world, it's safe to say even at the Smithsonian, you have materials that are not properly cared for, even in the best of times. And so you need a permanent thing. It's not like you take care of something once and then it's good for the rest of time. And so we said to the government, look, it would be good to establish some type of center for conservation of materials in Haiti. And that way you could also do planning for other disasters in the future. And you could take care and you can train people and service institutions. It's not like you were going to agglomerate all of Haiti's treasures and put it in one building, but this could be a focus for people doing work and knowing how to do it and then going back and saving in their own place. So the Haitian government gave the project this site. Looks pretty nice, right? Classic old gingerbread. If you go to Port-au-Prince, you see lovely gingerbread houses. They're wonderful. They were period in Haitian architecture, and there's a bunch of projects trying to go to save them. Well, you look at that, it looks pretty good in terms of scent, and then you go around back, and it's pretty bad. So there's no way. This was all termite infested, structurally unsound. We could not save this building. And so we needed to build a new building, needed money to build a new building. Okay, so another coincidence. So I told you about Ms. Obama before. That was one kind of good luck on this. So we did a movie at the museum, at the Smithsonian a few years ago called Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian. Right? So we had all these people around, Owen Wilson and Amy Adams and Ben Stiller, and they kind of liked it. So Ben Stiller ended up giving us money for this structure, his foundation, to basically rebuild the structure. And the idea was to raise other money for conservation and so on, for training, get the Haitian government to put up a little, get some international partners to come up. So we'd be able to, again, put this together and keep it going and deal with stuff. So all sorts of plans for new construction and how to make it educationally sound, reuse some of the materials that we were able to salvage from the beginning. And also very important in any project is how to get sustainability by transferring this over to Haitian authorities. The Smithsonian is not going to run this, an international coalition is not going to run it. Haitians really have to run it and take hold and do that. And so that's what we did in terms of various agreements and so on to the Haitian Ministry of Culture and an organization called ISPAN. Transferring it over. I mean, during the time, it was ably led already. Olsen Jean-Julien, who had been the Minister of Culture, was the project manager for this. Again, Olsen got his MA in architecture from Columbia University. He'd worked for the Smithsonian. Olsen is, I could say it for the tape, right? He's a real kick-ass guy who's really smart and can get stuff done. Patrick Villar, who's a great scholar, community organizer, developer, and a whole wonderful crew of Haitian colleagues, but you still need that government structure and government imprinter because you are collecting people's treasures from all sorts of places, public and private collections. And you need some level of legal accountability. So as we're developing plans for rebuilding this or building a new center downtown near the Presidential Palace for conservation, we kept training going. We kept sending people down to Haiti to train conservators, to keep doing that work. Now, again, we have saved more than 35,000 items. I mean, paintings, sculptures, rare books, a lot of stuff, And we've trained about 150 Haitians in a range of kind of skills. I'd say about 12 people really, really well, and I'd say about 130 people with enough of basic training to know what they're doing. But people who need more advanced treatment to do more stuff. Okay, so another story. So one of the guys we send down, again, we put out the call for conservators who'd worked in crisis situations, and one of them was a guy named Mark Aronson, who's the chief conservator for the Center for British Art at Yale. Mark was in Haiti. He loved his time there. He really loved it. And he felt valuable and useful. And he said, Richard, why doesn't Yale host a few Haitian trainees at Yale? And we'll bring them up during the summer. And here's some of the people you've brought along. They could give you more advanced training, and then they could transfer it, to others. So we thought that was a great idea. Although in the back of my mind, I was thinking, okay, the Center of British Art in Yale. Here we're going to have these Haitian trainees working on paintings of, British guys with wigs who try to, take over their society. Okay, Well, it turns out, so Mark goes snooping around Yale, snooping around the Peabody Museum, and he comes up with these paintings. You can kind of see them from the side here. And he said, Richard, we have, I don't remember, it was like 18 paintings of Haitian leaders and revolutionary leaders from the 1870s. I said, how did you get that? He says, well, it's funny. There's a tag on the back of these that says Smithsonian Institution. Oh, well, it turns out a professor who actually I know, and I don't know, maybe Sid Mintz, who ended up was working in the Caribbean. He had requested them. They were transferred to Yale from the Smithsonian in the 60s or 70s. But where did these paintings come from? Well, we're still tracking it down, and now there's a few people in Africana Studies at Yale who are trying to track these down. At first, we thought there was a connection. I don't know where I'm situated, but where's the Midway? You're all pointing in different directions. What? Okay. Don't they teach geography at the University of Chicago? Okay. So the first thought was that, well, these were painted at a time that Frederick Douglass was the emissary to Haiti. And so there was thought that, and then there was reports that Frederick Douglass, when he was at, you remember he gave talks, you remember. He gave talks at the World's Fair in Chicago. And so there was some documentation that maybe these were pictures, these were paintings that he had used as a backdrop for his talk at the Chicago World's Fair, Columbian World's Fair. There's another, and I think maybe there's more evidence for this, that Douglass had used them at the Cotton Exposition sometime in the, I think in the 1880s maybe or something. So we're trying to figure out, we're trying to track down the provenance and the history of these paintings, but it's fascinating. And it looks like Douglas had, a role in the in the painting of these paintings, bringing them to the U.S. And then what often happens, and this is it's not such a tricky thing that the Smithsonian does, but through our history, the way we've acquired a lot of our collections is the stuff left over from things. Nobody wants to pack it up and bring it back home, so they send it to the Smithsonian. So we've gotten tons of collection, and my guess is after either that Cotton Exposition or the Chicago World's Fair in '83, they shipped it off to the Smithsonian. We had it, and in the 60s, Sid Mintz, a professor of anthropology, discovers them in the Smithsonian collection. He's up at Yale, needs to do something with them and requests their deaccession or their transfer to Yale. So anyway, there they are. They're working on them. They worked on these last summer. They'll be back again this summer. So now Yale's actually hiring for a conservator, and they're starting a program. And Haitian conservators will be working on restoring these. So, what started out as an emergency situation, starts developing these other lovely tentacles about people from different societies and different cultures, really learning from each other and developing these longer-term relations. So we've done a number of things. There's a Smithsonian Channel documentary we did on Haiti's treasures, fair to Midland. I did a book last year on saving Haiti's heritage. It's available online. You can just download it if you want. And it's really the inside story of a lot of the projects. So I don't know, Larry, Larry's in it. He didn't, I didn't throw many punches in there. I mean, I didn't pull any punches. I threw a lot of punches. I did. Okay, and then, so again, other kind of connections coming out of it, and then I'll wrap up. So Hurricane Sandy hits New York. So we got a call at the Smithsonian from the Met, Natural History, MoMA, and others. Hey, artists on the, artists in Lower Manhattan are really hit. Studios are in trouble. We got flooded thing. Martha Graham's costumes are underwater. Can the Smithsonian help out? It was the same coalition. The American Institute of Conservation, Blue Shield, Smithsonian, federal groups, IMLS, that came together that ended up sending up supplies and truckloads of things and conservators to help people in New York. And so that effort, I mean, nobody ever, thought that by the Broadway League, giving, their money to Haiti would actually come back and benefit New York City, but it did. And so, but it also, when Sandy hit, there was a call from museums and everything else. Nobody knew. Nobody was in charge. Like call FEMA. Like remember Brownie? Call FEMA. So, do you call FEMA for cultural stuff and artwork? Do you call the National Endowment for the Arts? Who do you call? Who's there? So just as we didn't have a ready-built coalition or system for dealing with international crises, again, in war and in disaster, we actually don't have one for domestic ones either. So it's really got us thinking quite a bit. We established a store place in Brooklyn. People could bring their stuff and so on. Okay, so here we are. Next, Ansar al-Din in Mali. Again, we have long ties to Mali. One of our anthropologists, Mary Jo Arnoldi, works in Mali. Alpha Konari, former president of Mali, anthropologist, done a lot of stuff with the Smithsonian. Samuel Sidibe, the head of the National Museum. Hey, Richard, we got to do something. What was happening is Ansar al-Din went into Timbuktu. You had people worried that they were going to blow up stuff and take stuff. In Timbuktu, you have people with thousands and thousands of manuscripts, hundreds of years old, documenting West African life. And people started taking those documents that they care for in their own family libraries and burying them in the desert, so they would not get destroyed. Well, after they're buried in the desert, you got to dig them up and take care of them. So now we're working with a number of folks to do that. About 20 or 30,000 manuscripts have got to Bamako. We have meetings next week with Samuel Sidibe. Will be here in Washington, and trying to figure out whether we set up shop, where in Mali we set up shop and do what we did in Haiti. And then others have come up. So Messanak, I don't know if you guys are involved in that, Oriental Institute involved, or Lagardas. It came Again, with the efforts of Corey Wegner, people get in touch with her through Blue Shield, others to the Smithsonian. Mark Knoyer, archaeologist up at Wisconsin, was out there. You have the world's second largest copper deposit in the world in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in eastern Afghanistan. It's sitting on top of that copper mine is sitting one of the world's largest Silk Road sites. Goes back to Bronze Age all the way up. Huge. I mean, takes over a number of these hilltops. And basically the Afghans have sold it out to the Chinese mining company. They gave some, 3 French guys with T-shirts, like 2 years to salvage the thing, which they couldn't do. It's in, Taliban territory. And so the idea is that going to be blown up? The Chinese and mining that going to be blown up? And so now we're trying to work with the State Department, some of the other groups, to figure out is the way you can mine this, where the Afghans can get their money, the Chinese can get their copper, and the rest of the world can benefit from the heritage that's sitting on that mountaintop. So trying to work that through. All of this has made me realize that, again, there's no coordination, there's no systems, and there's no money. And what we need for culture is we need kind of like culture without borders, just like you got doctors without borders. You got physicians, they got a duffel bag next to the door, ready to go so they can treat people. We don't have anything like that for culture. And you have people with money in the bank who can start something. You have agreements in place. You have drop zones. And so I think culture, both domestically and internationally, needs that. So now this is my big project to try to work on. So it's not just because I see all those kind of movies and want to have a command center or anything, but the idea is what's behind that. There have to be people sitting at the desk. There have to be databases behind that. There has to be, lists of people who can help, expertise, reconnaissance, reports on what's happening. Okay, right now, as good as our national system is, Larry sending emails to people. I heard that they're doing this. I heard that. No, I mean, the weight of of a lot of cultural items is on Larry's shoulders here, because he's sending out emails. We heard that there was a mob there. They're burning this. Who knows about this? Who could do this? How can you protect it? So we need to do a little better. And I think that's what I'm hoping the Smithsonian could play an important role, a leadership role in helping to coordinate that and do that. And I think if we do that, to me it shows, you often think about museums. Museums can be thought of in a dusty, stodgy way as like an end in themselves. You walk in the door, you have a great time, it looks super, and you'll learn something. It's great. But I think more and more we've seen over the last few decades a movement where museums are really a means to an end. And you have to ask, what's that end? Why do we preserve this stuff? And why do we have the skills and foster the skills and put the enormous amount of money that goes into it? And I think, really, the purpose of a museum is to encourage the cultural heritage, creativity, everything that's worthy of being in there that's really outside its walls. Just in the same way when we look at a natural history museum and you think, okay, is it about the museum or is it preserving species and habitats? And I think the same thing in the cultural realm. It really is about encouraging the continued creativity of humankind. So with that, I'll stop for questions. Yes?
You mentioned how one of the...
You're gonna edit out all the curse words, right? Like all that.
I think that makes it more interesting.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, anyway, you mentioned earlier that one of the initiatives that the Smithsonian is going to take is to look at their, I guess you could say, intangible heritage. That is the plays, like art, like video recordings, audio recordings. What is the process of that going to look like? Is it like, for example, taking these recordings and transferring them to a digital format? And then with that information, is the Smithsonian going to, I guess, preserve it within your own archives, in addition to Haiti, like the Haitians preserving it within their archives, in order just to better safeguard it? Or is there a problem with, for example, an American institution taking this intangible heritage outside of Haiti and placing it within our own borders?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of questions in there. If you think about the Smithsonian's, no, it's fine. If you think about the Smithsonian's work in the 19th century in America, people at that time thought that American Indian cultures would inevitably disappear. And so because of the efforts of Mr. Edison and Mr. Bell and people like that, the Smithsonian very early on in the late 1870s, 1880s, started sending anthropologists and others to document American Indian languages, stories, and songs, because we thought they would disappear. And the idea was to have an archive so that stuff would be preserved. And it's all on cylinder recordings, and not easy to do, but it was a massive effort over several decades. So, you know, you could look at it at one point as an archival salvage project, if the project really is to say, okay, here's this, you know, this Haitian cultural life, and the idea is to get it onto some stable media, and that means digitization. And then, so it's stable, and then sock it away in our archives. Well, then you have a record of what was. But I think we all realize that, just like with our language projects with American Indians, the idea is to get those things back so you can encourage people talking and thinking in those languages, because there may be some knowledge there. There may be insights there that can help the rest of us. So I think the same thing in Haiti. As we do that, our idea is not to take them back to the Smithsonian by any means, but if we're able to establish this center, and that's, I'm in a rocky fight right now because it's a new administration, is that we would basically have the studio. So imagine a room like this with stations, and you're bringing in your family photos. You're bringing in your old cassettes and 8-tracks that I know you have. And you're then transferring them to digital. And then what we would ask, you take back a digital copy, take back your originals, take back a digital copy, and if you're willing to deposit one in some type of national Haitian collection. So it's just like a backup copy, right? So in case something happens, you know, next week to your house, at least there's a copy of that stuff. And then the idea is absolutely to make it accessible to people so they could use it for continuing things. Look, how many people read the, I mean, I don't know, my sense of the University of Chicago scholarship is one of its real strengths is always rediscovery and reinterpretation of something that, you know, Durkheim or Weber wrote, you know, like a long time ago. And so the idea that the same thing I think exists in artistry, you know, people are always discovering, oh, this person did a play, this person wrote a script, this person had this speech, and that is the cause for contemporary inspiration and creativity. So you'd want to make all that stuff available. The intangible cultural heritage is not the documentation of the intangible cultural heritage. Don't mistake the singing of songs for a recording of the song. That is what you want to do ultimately in preserving intangible cultural heritage is to help preserve the social processes and the cultural processes that enable people to sing those songs and make them up in the first place. That means access. That means all sorts of things that usually we don't think about because we usually think either as scholars or museum people, we're kind of extractive. You know, we kind of get that, we write a book, we get in our archives, we do an exhibit, and that's not the end of it. You know, the end of it is really making sure that that is in the hands of people who will continually use that to create.
There's the limited case, of course, of the Indian songs that the tribe says are sacred songs and
you know,
should not be heard by any that the Smithsonian now has, but nobody will ever be able to hear it.
Yes,
Because
we do get that.
This is a deal that they made, right?
You know, you do make agreements with people, although it's interesting what happens. We had a thing recently with, it wasn't a Smithsonian anthropologist, but it was another anthropologist who ended up recording these Australian Aboriginal songs. And they were basically men's songs. They were kind of sacred society, you know, men's society songs, probably 8th grade or something. And, you know, as long as it was in Washington and an archive somewhere, like, who cared about it, right? You know, if you're living in Australia, you wouldn't have access. But now with the internet, stuff is up. So all of a sudden, there were some women in the community that can now listen to the men's sacred songs. Well, some of those men got really upset with the Smithsonian. Take those down. How could you? So is this really a tradition thing that you're enforcing, or is this contemporary politics where tradition is being used as a category of gender politics? Sort those things out. So you know, you do get this.
So do you think that some of, or many of our issues would be solved if we had a Ministry of Culture?
Well, you're going to get Bill Ivey is going to talk, right?
He came first.
Oh, he came first. Okay. Well, I've debated Bill, you know, for years on the question. I think it's some of them could be solved, but I think it's a kind of cost-benefit analysis. I think it's impossible politically to have a Ministry of Culture in the United States. we have people functioning de facto in that way. I mean, I meet with all ministers of culture, people at the State Department, Mike Kaiser Kennedy. I mean, it's kind of distributed in a way. But I think the U.S. public would not, it's almost non-understandable, the whole notion of culture being government regulated. I mean, it's not that we don't, kind of in a way, but if you did that, you'd really call it out. And, there's conflicts with freedom of speech and expression. Yeah, we do have an official song in some, I don't know what the official song of Illinois is, or the official bird or whatever, but, if you really kind of pushed all that official, state stuff, I think, American people would have a hard time with it. But certainly in the issue, where do you go? The question is like, what button do you push? Where do you go? Who's responsible? That is not there. And that's why I actually think in something like this, the Smithsonian emerged as a good player, not that it was obvious at the beginning, but because we're public and private. So we have, 5,000 federal employees. We get about $850 million from the federal government. We have federal standing. Some people travel around on federal passports. We do all that kind of official thing. I'm an undersecretary. I mean, that sounds official. But, but 1,000 of us are private, and we're not bound by federal law or prescription. We have to testify in Congress. We have to do all the kind of usual stuff. But we're an interesting animal, so we can play much more freely in the NGO world. Most government agencies, you can only do what you can do by law. There's a law that says, okay, we're going to have something called Social Security, or we're going to take part of your your wages. I mean, there's a positive law to do something. The private sector doesn't work like that. The private sector and people work, they say, oh, wow, there's a need, we need to do something, and they do it. They don't necessarily have to wait for a law to be passed. So agencies are pretty much bound. You work with the Ambassador Fund, right? I mean, that's, in this, when I was there, we had some heavy duty, back and forth with State Department over what they could do with their money. And State Department in this crisis said, hey, we can't just change this program and put $2 million to this cultural recovery stuff. We're bound by Congress and the rules to give it for, University of Chicago students so they can get Fulbrights and, all this other stuff. We can't just move that around. In the U.S. government, and for our federal money, we're not allowed to move more than $100,000 out of an $850 million budget. We can't move more than $100,000 around without permission from Congress. Where on the private side, for our $500 million budget, we can do anything not anything we want to do. We are very great, very true to donors' purposes and other things upon which we get that money. Yes.
You mentioned you had to build space to keep the archives in Haiti, and in terms of Haiti and also here and wherever you go, how do you have to ever kind of make Sophie's choices in terms of what you do preserve and what there's simply not room for, and how do you choose?
Well, I mean, I think on this, what we did is we worked very closely with, our Haitian colleagues because they had a much better idea of what was culturally significant. And so literally, when we started pulling out the stuff for the Santa Art, we knew we were under a time deadline because stuff literally was, molding and mildewing before our eyes. Stuff was, and you say, well, you got 10,000 things, what do you do first? And so really, as we were pulling stuff out, we had basically a team, a committee of Haitian artists, art historians, and others who were sitting there saying, yeah, triage, I mean, think MASH, yes, goes to the head of the list, goes in the middle, goes to the back. So it was total triage. And we did that over and over and over again. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the presentation. There's an old saying that says if you educate women, you preserve the culture and heritage. And from looking at your various slides, I'm wondering to what extent Haitian women are holding leadership roles in building their country.
Quite a bit. The head of the Santa Art project was Marie-Lucie Vandrez, who is an art historian, educating who ran that project. The project on the murals was really run by two women. They weren't Haitian, but they were from other countries. We worked, the lead agency that we worked with in Haiti, where all the money went through and provided really the kind of, a lot of the day-to-day clout, was a Focal, an organization Focal. I don't know if you know Focal, okay. So Lorraine is the executive director of that. She was involved in this every day. Former prime minister, involved many, can't believe how many meetings with that, and her providing a lot of the leadership in terms of doing that. And then on the staff, I mean, our registrar, I mean, you know, the staff was very mixed.
I say that to the extent that I'm somewhat familiar with Haitian culture, and the men are very macho. They want to assume leadership roles in some sense, but I also think that the women also need to have an active voice in how the country is rebuilt.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I did mention, you know, it was funny about the macho thing, because, you know, that's out there, right? I mean, it's not like it's hidden, it's out there. And so with Viviana on the murals project, I mean, that's why people called her Captain Dominguez. The guys saluted. She was very serious. And I think she provided a model for, you know, a role model for many of the Haitian women on the project as well. Yeah.
What's the story with other countries with ministries of culture? Has that even pushed for leadership, organization, and coordination from countries like France or England or Germany or anything like that?
Oh, get me going on France. Now, my wife is French, so I love in this case, look at my book. I mean, because I do get into some of the wrangling. I mean, and I participated with UNESCO a lot in my career, have been a pretty big supporter, have done a lot with them, and try to, you know, right now the U.S. is about to drop out of UNESCO because we're not paying our dues. So I think in theory, we need an organization like that, but it's such a talk group rather than a do group. So the UNESCO, in the wake of Haiti, spent more money in conferences, bringing people to Paris to talk about how the world had to help Haiti than it ever raised in doing anything on the ground in Haiti. Anything. And then 2 years later, the UNESCO came out with a brochure and a plan to spend $23 million on Haiti. And rather than being responsive to what Haitians were looking for and needed on the ground, it was how Haiti could then conform to UNESCO programs. It was the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen. And very, very upsetting. Very, very upsetting. In terms of other countries, basically at one point there were, I think, certainly in the Blue Shield community, there was the French Blue Shield, who basically did not want the U.S. to go in. They looked at it in very nationalistic terms. And I have to say, you know, look, Americans maybe were not aware, you know, of like, you know, how we might step on people's toes or how we may seem to other people in the world. I think that's accurate. Sometimes you're just not aware. But the French took like, oh, the Americans are going to do this. Well, we were trying to put together an international team, and we did. And we were working hand in glove with our Haitian colleagues. But I think the French took this as, oh, this is our sphere of influence. How could the Americans be doing this? And so they came up with this fakakta program. If anybody knows Yiddish, fakakta, it means like fucked up. So they came up with this totally nutty program where they were going to prefabricate stuff in Europe, and they were going to put it on a ship and send it to Haiti. And they got Lorraine Mangones to take her land. Lorraine had to spend $70,000 to level land and clear for this stupid thing. And then they were going to import 900 volunteer conservators from around the world. There was no talking with the Haitians. The thing was so overblown, it would cost zillions of dollars, and nothing ever happened with it. But what they did is they got a grant from the Prince Claus Fund that does support some cultural heritage work. They took up a lot of space, giving everybody the impression that they were going to do. Now, if I'm a person waiting for aid, and I'm waiting for my food that day, and somebody says they're going to do it, and therefore somebody else didn't send the truck of food, and then it never shows up, and it never shows up the next day, you get really upset. And I think that's what happened in some of these things. So my experience is a lot of the ministers of culture make great declarations, they talk big, nothing happens.
Yeah, I have a question about like when you were working there in Haiti, was there an issue of security?
Yep.
Or, like,
big issue of security. We had, with the place we had, I think 6 guys with, guns, and the Smithsonian security that came before they let us occupy the building, even though we fought back. You know, they're like advocating standards for Washington, D.C. We're saying we're in the middle of an earthquake zone, you know. But we did do some extra barbed wire and extra fencing around the place. And, you know, I think to some extent that was justified because we had things worth tens of millions of dollars and irreplaceable. So security was a big concern. The other issue was in terms of people staying. So we had people coming down from all over the world, all over the United States staying. And there you always get that kind of culture shock. And, you know, you're always going to get cases. I think, you know, 95% of the people who came down, like, were with it. Okay, we're flexible. You know, I might not get a hot shower. You know, I'm down for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. This might be a little tough, whatever. So most people were very flexible, and what we did is we took over a house nearby. So we had a rental house with security, with, you know, a house staff, so we didn't have to worry about, I mean, we'd always had to put people in hotels because we had too many people, but we tried to do it in very secure things. We fought with the embassy because the embassy, U.S. Embassy, would put people an hour and a half outside of Port-au-Prince for their security. They would not let people travel unless they were traveling in steel, you know, reinforced armored cars. We said, we can't run an operation like that. You know, it was very tight. So, you know, we took license because we weren't federal. You know, we didn't have anybody traveling on their federal passports. You know, we took more license, and you know, people gave us a pass on that. We did have a few people that just freaked out. You know, they just didn't know what they were getting into, and all of a sudden, you know, I mean, Haiti was awful after. I mean, you had people living in tents and tarps on the street. There was a lot of hardship in the society. There were gangs in places. People were getting kidnapped. One of the people on our project, Haitian, his wife was kidnapped and ransomed. You did have issues. Yeah. So we were very attentive. You know, we were attentive to them, but, you know, at some point, I mean, you know, it's a risky situation.
Yeah, I mean, because you mentioned in an interview about this, that you were concerned because, you know, there was a similar situation in Iraq, and, you know, the looting that took place in Iraq, and you didn't want that to happen in this case as well, you know?
No.
Yeah.
So, and some places you'd go and you'd have, you know, people don't know you from, you know, Adam. I mean, okay, we're from the Smithsonian. Okay, big deal. You know, or you're from the Seattle Art Museum, even worse. You know, so people, you know, could take you as, you know, whatever. I mean, different ways. Times were tense in Haiti. But overall, I mean, I think people had, you know, tremendous appreciation. I think first there was a lot of people, because we had those relationships in Haiti where a lot of people really helped us in terms of those ties. And then in other things we had to earn. You know, we really had to earn it and say, hey, we really are here to help. Oh, you're here to help, sure, yeah. We really are, and we did earn it. And then you're always going to get some people that are very skeptical. I'm not going to do it no matter what. And you guys are predatory. You shouldn't be doing. I mean, still to this day. I mean, people. In fact, that's my problem right now. The person that took over the cultural agency doesn't like this project at all. And they think it was a subversion of Haitian authority, that the Haitian government should do all this. Well, the Haitian government hasn't a clue or capacity to do any of this. That stuff would have sat, those murals would have collapsed, the stuff would have sat in the rubble, none of that would have been saved. But that's their position, and they're sticking to it. So now we're kind of going back and forth, and actually right now I'm at the crux of saying, okay, well, if we're going to rebuild this center, maybe not do it with the government and do it with one of the NGO museums or organizations, because it's hard. Well, if you followed anything in Haiti, I mean, there's a lot of work on Haiti in terms of, you know, how nobody works with the government. Government's dysfunctional. You don't work with the government. So everybody's working. It's the republic of NGOs, barely a republic. You know, church groups go in and work with other church groups. People start hospitals. Nobody works with the government. The government, therefore, is undermined, and therefore complains that you're undermining their sovereignty because you're working with private groups. But the only reason you're doing that is because there's no government partner to do it with. So, you know, it is a cycle.
Diplomacy problem, right?
Incredible, incredible. So you got to decide sometimes whether you want to be nice or whether you want to be successful. It's great to be both, but sometimes you have to make that kind of choice. And right now, the choice we made there was to, be successful. At this point in the project, now we're 3 years down the road. We've done a lot. I really wonder. I mean, in fact, Olsen Jean-Julien, who was running this project in Haiti, former Minister of Culture, said, emailed to Richard, what are we going to do? Because we're I'm at the point saying, okay, hey, declare victory. We've done all we can do. Now it's up to Haiti. If the government doesn't want to do this, if the government doesn't want to save those videotapes, if the government doesn't want to conserve those things, I can't make them do that. And so we'll just work piecemeal with private galleries, private artist museums, NGOs, whoever, does, but it'll be a much reduced effort. So I really don't know which way that's going to go. Yeah.
I was just wondering what the status is of your proposed cultural recovery center, because you mentioned how sort of impossible it is to get things done. So I was just wondering, what steps do you even begin to take to put that into?
How much money you got? I would like to get a pot. I have some federal money, a few $100,000, but so like when it comes to Mali, we could send a team. I mean, tomorrow. I mean, we can send some equipment. We can, take over a rent or help, Samuel Sidibe from the National Museum get an operation together. We can hire a few people. We can get going. But if you're going to sustain something of any size, I mean, we're not going to get, involved in something unless it's major. There's no use, because it can be handled, usually locally or regionally. A minister of culture will muddle through, fine. But if it really is major, you need a few $1 million at least for a crisis. So what I would like to have is a fund with about $10 million in it. And I'd like to have a small staff, a staff and some operational money, about $2 million a year. So $2 million a year and about a $10 million fund. And so you can handle probably 3 crises a year if you have to. Some are going to be more expensive, some less. And you can jump right in. And so I'm trying to raise private money for that.
So $2 million a year in
operational, yeah.
So you would need, if that's 4%, so 250. What?
Well, you need 20 times that. You need that would be a big endowment, but
yeah, to get it endowed it'd be 40, 50 million.
Yeah, but if I could do it by federal, I can just take, I could take that as an annual. See, if I could use the operating, I'd like to do the operating as federal. And we are making progress on that in terms of trying to, make the case with folks in Congress, some law writing, work with, some of it may end up coming as grants from, we get the Department of Defense and Department of State say, hey, look, we don't want any part of this business. It's too complicated. We're not really organizers. We'll run, we'll trip over ourselves in terms of doing this. Here's Smithsonian. Here's $1 million from state. Here's $1 million from defense. Whenever there's a thing, we know who to call, and you guys do it. It's a trickle in their budget, but it could be significant culturally. So I think I can get the operating federal, but I'd like a fund of about $10 million that's rotating. Look, Red Cross and any other group, Doctors Without Borders, they're always raising money during a crisis for the next crisis. The money they use today is money they raised in the last crisis. So you always need that, because if you're raising money as you're trying to do stuff, you can't do it. You need to deploy.
You need a pump priming.
Yeah.
Don't you think there are already people in various agencies who think they're doing first response?
You want me to be diplomatic or not? Some of our, yeah. I mean, some of our friends, hey, you can apply for a grant. We'll give you $25,000 next year, and that'll be our response.
Well, I'm just wondering, in terms of getting buy-in from different agencies, if you're potentially stepping on toes, because I would see something like, for sure, Mali, since the State Department, the Cultural Property Office has this cultural property agreement with Mali. They would see that maybe coming under their, not jurisdiction, but within their purview, right? So would they willingly say to you, oh, we can't handle this, you should do it? And I'm thinking of the person who runs it, who's a bit of a micromanager.
Yeah, no, and we deal with them all the time. I mean, I think, and Larry and I were talking about it at the beginning. I mean, we're trying to. I think what you need to do in stuff like that is, you have these very carefully defined, treaties, agreements, and programs internally, and they're really very set. And what I learned in this case is you have to be much more flexible in that. And so you're not going to get legislation written by Congress, 15 years ago that's now become solidified as an institutional program in state or defense that all of a sudden says, oh yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that. It doesn't happen that way. It's pretty narrow. And so what I'm looking for is basically authority to do what we need to do, but also have enough flexibility to really respond to the diversity of situations that, real people face. We're going to face more in terms of climate change. I mean, anybody who's looked at any of those maps of where you have like all these wonderful cultural heritage sites located like in Europe, everybody's on the bank of a river that's going to, overflow.
Future belongs to you.
It's tough sledding. It's taken me a while. I've learned a lot in the last 3 years. Oh, good. Okay. Well,
Thank you.
good.
Thank you.